Internationally enforceable agreements, I mean, you admitted they're almost impossible to nail down. So how would the world, Ivo, police any agreement?
Well, the first thing I think is incredibly important is moral policing. In the clip we saw just now, it was said that people do what the governments want. But I hope that governments do what the people want. And I think if we get a clear signal that people want to see action on this, then governments will be held morally accountable. Yes, of course, in legal terms, you can do things in an international agreement to safeguard that it's implemented. In the case of Kyoto, if you fail to meet your target, you get a 30% penalty next time around. But at the end of the day, you see very few wanted posters for prime ministers and presidents hanging at airports because they have not met an international obligation.
Everybody, is that good enough, though? Anybody?
I think there should be sanctions. I mean, if people don't meet there should be a legally binding agreement. And if not, there should be sanctions, because I'm afraid that people won't mitigate their carbon.
I think you really, I just don't see a mechanism that we could do that, though, quite honestly. I'd like to see it be much more of a competition. And I would like to see my country take the lead in that competition. You know, in the Cold War, Becky, we had a space race. Who could be the first to put a man on the moon? Only 2 countries were involved, and only one could win. I think what we need now is the Earth race. Which country can be the first to invent the most green technology so men and women can stay here on Earth? Okay, and I want to see America competing against China, China trying to beat Japan, Japan trying to beat Russia, Russia trying to beat Brazil. I think we'll get there a lot faster than trying to have an international court saying you violated your CO2 emissions.
Well, you're back with the CNN YouTube debate on climate change. I'm Becky Anderson in Copenhagen. Well, at the very heart of this debate is the division between nations, rich against poor, polluters versus the polluted. Well, our next question comes from Oluwashola, a Nigerian based in Morocco.
Here is my question. How many African leaders were invited to Copenhagen, since this issue is not just a matter of the world leaders or the advanced country alone? It's the matter that affects every one of us. My second question is, what can Africa themselves do to make sure this problem will not happen?
All right. Well, to help us answer that question, let's bring in a very special panellist. Joining us from Geneva in Switzerland, the former UN Secretary General and Nobel Peace Prize winner Kofi Annan. You are more than welcome, sir. You head up one of the foremost think tanks, of course, on global warming. You heard the question. Does Africa have a loud enough voice?
No, Africa doesn't. But I don't think the voice should be Africa's alone. We are all in this together. What is clear is that Africa and the least developed countries, which are not so much responsible for the problem of climate change, bear the greatest brunt. And we hope that as we come together in Copenhagen, we will all understand that we are in the same boat. It is the climate change issue cannot be resolved on one continent, in one nation, but not in the other. If we are indeed in the same boat, a hole at one end will sink all of us. So if we start on that premise, how do we ensure that we protect our planet? And I think the panelists have made some very good points. And come together to really pool together as we should to be able to protect the planet, then we are going to make progress. So it's not each region or each country for itself, but it is our collective responsibility. And in the case of Africa, there's also another point that we need to bear in mind, the question of equity and justice. If indeed these countries are not responsible for the vast part of the problem we are facing, we do have some responsibility towards them.
Right. Okay, but let me ask you a question here.
The polluter must pay.
Or is Africa doing enough for itself at this point?
I think some African countries are doing enough, trying to make sure that they replant forest, they stop extension of deserts, They are now struggling to find the right seeds, the drought-resistant seeds that will help them. And they are very conscious of the impact of climate change on development and are aware that if they don't take measures, it will roll back even the gains they have made.
Stay with us a moment, Mr. Annan. Darrell, what would you add? You're well versed in what it takes to draw attention to particular issues. What are the keys to being heard, do you think?
I think everybody, no matter what profession you're in, I think everybody needs to do their part. And I think probably the best way is to really look at your own lifestyle and try to live by example. And I think that's the most compelling thing that anybody can do.
What have you been doing? Talk us through what you've done in the past.
I don't use petroleum, for one thing. Haven't used petroleum for a number of years. Make sure that my fuel is all made from responsible resources as well, waste grease and things like that. I've been on solar power for about 19 years now. I think we should put solar panels on the White House, you know, start setting an example right in our seat of government. I have, you know, grown a lot of my own food, grey water systems, composting toilets, the whole thing, you know.
Let me move us on just a little bit here, because this next video comes from Minar Pimpel, who currently leads the UN Millennium Campaign's work in Southeast Asia. Here is his question.
Climate change crisis has hit the hardest, the most vulnerable and the poorest people in the world. I am at present in one of such countries, Bangladesh. We believe that the climate crisis and eradication of poverty go hand in hand. What do you think that the world leaders should do so that we have a just deal in Copenhagen which integrates the eradication of poverty, achievement of Millennium Development Goals in terms of dealing with the climate crisis?
Minar Pimpel there from Bangladesh. And people like Pimpel are demanding action. Are they, though, getting it, Mr. Annan?
I don't think we are getting it yet, but it ought to be possible if the political will is there. What we have to be careful here is that lots of big sums are being talked about in Copenhagen to help the poor countries in mitigation, adaptation, and allow them to permit transfer of green technology to encourage them to develop sustainably without adding to the problem. But we have to make sure that these sums are additional and not instead of development aid.
So, Kofi, are you saying enough is being done or not?
Is important.
Are you happy or disappointed with what's being done?
No, I'm saying I'm not happy. Lots of promises have been made which have not been kept, and only promises kept are promises which matter. The countries themselves are trying. We see it all around the world, but they need help. I don't think enough is being done.
And with that, we're going to leave it there, Mr. Annan. We thank you very much indeed for joining us.